After the argument at my husband's family Christmas dinner, every person at the table turned on me, including the man who had promised to stand beside me for life. "Apologize to my mother," Ethan said, his voice sharp enough to silence the room, "or take your things and get out." So I did. The flight attendant asked whether I wanted tea. I said yes, and when I lifted the paper cup, my hand was perfectly steady. That surprised me more than anything. I was 38,000 feet above the Atlantic, my 4-year-old son asleep against my shoulder, 2 suitcases somewhere beneath us, and 2 one-way tickets to a city Ethan could barely pronounce. 10 hours earlier, I had stood in his parents' dining room while his relatives took turns explaining why I was selfish, cold, controlling, and unfit to be part of their family. And still, my hands had not shaken. For 6 years, they had shaken over smaller things. The pause before Cynthia made one of her harmless remarks, a missing payment in our bank history, the sound of Ethan unlocking the front door after midnight when he had promised to be home for dinner. Now I was leaving all of it behind at 500 miles an hour, and the only thing I felt was quiet. People imagine that destroying your old life happens during the shouting, the slammed chair, the public accusation, the ultimatum thrown across a holiday table. It doesn't. That is only the spark. The real moment is silent. It is a woman in seat 18A watching darkness stretch over the ocean while mentally reviewing the email she will send the second the plane lands. Because I had not run away. I need to make that clear before I tell the rest. By now, Ethan and his family were probably describing me as unstable, vindictive, and dangerous, a woman who had suddenly taken a child and disappeared. But nothing about that night was sudden. I did not panic. I did not stuff random clothes into a suitcase and hope for the best. I did not buy those tickets in tears. I had been preparing for 10 months. To understand why, we have to return to that Christmas table. Then we have to go further back, to the year I spent smiling politely across from people who believed I was weak, while quietly assembling the evidence that would end my marriage. My name is Natalie Mercer, and I work as an internal fraud investigator for an insurance company in Denver. I spend my days examining other people's financial records, duplicated invoices, hidden transfers, altered documents, patterns someone thinks are too small to notice. I notice them. I save copies. I compare dates. I write down exact words before anyone has the chance to change them later. Remember that. It becomes important. I met Ethan 9 years earlier at a charity auction hosted by a mutual friend. For a long time, I believed I had been lucky. He was effortless where I was careful. I read every page before signing. Ethan could persuade a room to sign without reading at all. He worked for a private investment company in Denver, inside a polished office tower with silent elevators, glass walls, and furniture designed to look expensive without appearing arrogant. His clients trusted him immediately. He remembered names, birthdays, children, retirement plans. He knew how to make people feel that their future was safe in his hands. I trusted him, too. The first warning had nothing to do with money. It was his mother. Cynthia decided what kind of woman I was before I had finished my first dinner in her house. I was the serious one. I was too ambitious. Once, while I was standing only a few feet away, she told Ethan that women with demanding careers often became emotionally unavailable. I was 28 and deeply in love, so I convinced myself she simply needed time. She did not soften. She became more precise. After Oliver was born, Cynthia developed an entire language for criticizing me while pretending to compliment me. I was so independent, spoken as though independence were a disease. Whenever I missed one of her Sunday lunches, she sighed and said she understood that some women valued work more than family. When I returned to my job after maternity leave, she announced to the entire family that I had allowed strangers to raise my baby. Ethan's older sister, Lauren, laughed. Lauren's husband, Mark, pretended to check his phone. Their 16-year-old son, Caleb, watched carefully and learned that mocking me was permitted. Ethan stared at his plate. That was what he always did. Whenever his mother insulted me, he suddenly became fascinated by whatever food was in front of him. In 9 years, he never once said, "That's enough, Mom." Not once. At night, I began collecting those silences in my mind, the way I collected suspicious patterns at work. I remembered every dinner, every joke, every moment he chose comfort over defending me. My own family was smaller and farther away. My father, Robert, lived outside Santa Fe. He was a retired railway technician who spoke rarely but never wasted a word. My mother had died when I was 23. She had been born in Valencia, and even after spending most of her adult life in America, part of her had always remained in Spain. Before I was old enough to understand why it mattered, she made sure I received Spanish citizenship. One day, she told me, "You may need another door." My grandmother had given me similar advice.
It happened in June at Robert's house outside Santa Fe. Ethan was in the backyard taking a phone call, and my father and I were cleaning up after lunch. He was drying a plate when he asked almost casually, "Did Ethan manage to repay the loan?" I stopped rinsing the glasses. "What loan?" My father's hands became still. Quiet men have a particular way of freezing when they realize they have said something they were not supposed to say. "The 12,000, he answered slowly, "for the property investment." I stared at him. "What property investment?" His eyes moved toward the window, where Ethan was pacing beside the fence with his phone pressed to his ear. "He said you both knew about it," my father said. "He said it was a short-term opportunity and that you agreed." $12,000. My father still compared grocery prices between stores. He repaired his own appliances rather than replace them. He had refused for years to let me pay for his dental work. And Ethan had taken $12,000 from him by using my name. I forced my face to stay calm. "It's handled, Dad." It was the first lie I had ever told my father that mattered. I told it because I could not bear to watch him understand that the man he trusted had used his love for me as collateral.
I waited until we were driving back to Denver. Oliver was strapped into a seat behind us, asleep with his cheek pressed against the side of his car seat. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the gear selector. I kept my voice level. "You borrowed $12,000 from my father." There was a pause before he answered. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but it told me more than the words that followed. "I was going to tell you when there was something useful to tell." You told him I had agreed. I said we had discussed investments. We never discussed taking my father's retirement money. Ethan's fingers tightened around the wheel. "Don't make this dramatic, Natalie. I'm asking a straightforward question." "No, you're interrogating me in my own car." His own car. The Honda was registered in both our names, and I had paid the down payment, but everything became his the moment I challenged him. His car, his money, his profession, his right to decide which questions were reasonable. "I'll repay Robert when the position closes," he continued. "The market is unstable right now. Constant pressure from you is not helping. You borrowed money from my father and lied about my involvement. I protected you from unnecessary stress." The sentence was so absurd that I almost laughed. Instead, I looked through the windshield and watched the desert highway stretch ahead of us. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, I opened the Regional Claims Review folder. I wrote down my father's exact words, Ethan's response, the date, the time, and where the conversation had taken place. I saved the note beside the screenshot of our vanished savings. It was no longer only protection against forgetting, it was becoming a record. The fourth discovery was the one that ended the marriage, although Ethan did not know it yet. Until then, some part of me had continued searching for an innocent explanation. Recklessness, perhaps. Pride. A temporary crisis he was too ashamed to admit. In July, I stopped searching for excuses. I began reading our financial documents the way I would read the records of someone under investigation. I did not enter Ethan's private email. I did not guess passwords or access accounts that did not belong to me. Everything I reviewed was legally available to me. Joint statements, tax documents, letters delivered to our shared home, and accounts carrying my name. The account ending in 9,836 was not an ordinary investment reserve. It was a margin trading account.
Ethan had been borrowing money to place increasingly risky options trades. Every loss had been followed by a larger bet. Month after month, the balance fell while the amount borrowed increased. I sat at the kitchen table after midnight with printed statements spread around me and reconstructed the timeline. The pattern was obvious once I stopped refusing to see it. He was not managing a temporary downturn. He was chasing losses. Our savings had gone first, then my father's money. But the largest amount had come from somewhere else. At the bottom of one statement, I found a payment connected to a home equity line of credit. $45,000 had been borrowed against our house 8 months earlier. I had never heard of the loan. I searched the cabinet where we stored mortgage records and found a thick envelope pushed behind an old insurance folder. Inside was the application. Both owners were listed. Both signatures appeared at the bottom. One signature belonged to Ethan, the other had my name. It looked almost correct. Almost. The first letter was too narrow. The final stroke curved upward in a way mine never did. Someone had studied my signature carefully enough to imitate it, but not carefully enough to become me. I had spent years using words like forgery and fraud in reports about strangers. That night, those words entered my house. They sat beside me at the kitchen table under the yellow light and stared back at me from a document carrying my copy name. For nearly a minute, I could not move. Then, something inside me shifted. I stopped thinking like a wife trying to save a marriage. I started thinking like an investigator preparing a case.
I photographed every page of the loan application. I saved the margin statements, the payment history, and the timeline I had reconstructed. I wrote down the date and time, July 19th, 2:26 a.m. Then I returned every document to exactly where I had found it. I did not confront Ethan. That decision was not fear, it was clarity. If he had forged my signature once, drained our savings, borrowed from my father, and hidden a loan against our home, then telling him what I knew would not repair anything. It would only warn him. He would move money, delete records, create explanations. Maybe he would convince me, for another week or another year, that the evidence in front of me did not mean what it clearly meant. So I stayed quiet. From that night forward, I was no longer trying to save the marriage. I was preparing to leave it. Still, one final piece of me wanted to give him a chance. In September, I asked him to sit with me after Oliver had gone to bed. I chose the living room because it felt neutral. No statements on the table, no screenshots, no accusations. Just one open door. "I think we're under more financial pressure than you've told me," I said. "I don't want to fight. I want us to put everything on the table and deal with it together." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What have you been looking at?" "Our joint accounts." "So you've been investigating me?" "I've been checking money that belongs to both of us." He leaned back and folded his arms. "This is what your job has done to you. You spend every day looking for dishonest people, and now you think everyone is hiding something." "I don't think everyone is. You think your husband is." I reached for his hand. "We can meet with a financial counselor. We can also speak to a marriage therapist. Whatever happened, I would rather hear the truth from you than discover it alone." For a moment, I hoped he might take my hand. Instead, he pulled his away. "My mother has always been right about you," he said. The words landed quietly. "You keep records. You count every dollar. You remember every argument. Everything with you becomes evidence. I'm asking you to be honest. No, you're trying to control me." His voice had become low and cold, stripped of the charm he used with clients and friends. "You don't know how to trust anyone, Natalie. You've kept score through this entire marriage." Then, without any sign that he understood the contradiction, he reached for his phone. "I need you to cover the MasterCard payment this month," he said. "Just temporarily. I'm waiting for a position to recover." I stared at him. "How much?" $1,480. "You just called me controlling for asking about our finances, and now you're doing it again." He stood and walked toward the kitchen. "Can you pay it or not?" I paid the bill the following morning. Not because I believed him, because paying it kept him calm. His calm gave me time, and time had become more valuable than money. I saved the payment confirmation in the folder. I also saved the audio from our conversation.
Rebecca gave me 3 rules that reorganized my entire life. First, I was not to confront Ethan again. "A person who controls the money will try to control the exit," she said. "If he knows you are preparing to leave, he may empty accounts, sell assets, or create a story before you have the chance to tell the truth." Second, I was to document facts, not feelings. Courts hear accusations every day, Rebecca explained. Dates, statements, signatures, and transaction histories are harder to argue with. Third, we would act first. We do not wait for him to make the next move, she said. We prepare, we file, and then we allow him to react. I wrote those words on a small card and kept it inside the zipped pocket of my work bag. Prepare, file, let him react. Rebecca introduced me to Adrian Cole, a forensic accountant who had spent 18 years tracing money through divorces, business disputes, and fraud investigations. I met him in a conference room that smelled faintly of printer toner and coffee. I brought copies of every document I had collected. Adrian listened without interrupting. Then he arranged the statements by date and began asking questions so specific that I finally understood how much I had been missing. For 3 weeks, he traced every transfer. His final report was 86 pages long. It showed exactly where our $52,000 in savings had gone. It showed the $12,000 Ethan took from my father. It showed the $45,000 borrowed against our house. Most of it had been lost through options trades. Some had been used to cover earlier debts. Several payments had gone toward credit cards I had never seen. There were hotel charges in Phoenix and San Diego on dates when Ethan had told me he was attending meetings in Denver. Adrian did not speculate about those, neither did I. By then, I had learned not to chase every betrayal when the financial ones were already enough. The report included a graph of the margin account. A black line climbed briefly, then dropped month after month until it looked as though it had fallen from the edge of the page. Adrian tapped it with his pen. "This is not investing," he said. "This is someone trying to win back money he has already lost." The forged signature required another expert. Her name was Dr. Simone Hart, a forensic document examiner who regularly testified in state and federal court. I gave her examples of my real signature from tax forms, employment contracts, and Oliver's preschool registration. She compared them with the signature on the home equity application. Her written conclusion arrived 12 days later. The questioned signature contained significant differences in pressure, rhythm, letter formation, and natural variation. Its features were consistent with a simulated reproduction rather than an authentic signature. In ordinary language, someone had copied my name. It had not been written by me. I read that paragraph 3 times.
For months, Ethan had called me suspicious, controlling, and incapable of trust. His mother had spent years presenting me as a difficult woman who searched for problems. Now 3 professionals had looked at the same facts: an attorney, a forensic accountant, a document examiner. Not one of them thought I was imagining anything. While they strengthened the case, I prepared the exit. I renewed Oliver's Spanish passport and checked that my own documents were valid. Through my mother, both of us held Spanish citizenship. I asked my employer to approve permanent remote work. My manager believed I wanted more flexibility for childcare and signed the request without hesitation. I opened a bank account in my name only and transferred my salary there. I moved nothing from our joint savings because almost nothing remained. I used only money that legally belonged to me, including the emergency cash my grandmother had taught me to keep. Rebecca reviewed every step. "Clean hands," she reminded me. "When this reaches court, we want your choices to be impossible to misrepresent." 3 weeks before Christmas, she filed a request for temporary emergency custody in Denver County. The request included Adrian's report, Simone's findings, and copies of the loan documents. A judge approved it. The signed order was placed in Rebecca's office safe beside a prepared divorce petition. Ethan knew none of this. He believed he was living with a wife who had finally become quiet. He did not understand that silence was no longer surrender. It was preparation.
Christmas dinner took place at Ethan's parents' house in Castle Rock, 40 minutes south of Denver. It was a large stone-fronted home with white columns, high ceilings, and rooms designed to prove that the family was doing well. Cynthia decorated it as though a magazine photographer might arrive at any moment. Every ribbon matched, every glass ornament faced outward. Even the folded napkins looked disciplined. I arrived knowing exactly what was inside my handbag: copies of the custody order,
both passports, Rebecca's number written on paper in case my phone disappeared, and the small card that said, "Prepare, file, let him react." For the first time in years, I did not feel trapped in that house. I had a door. Cynthia mistook that calm for weakness. Oliver spent the afternoon racing between the living room and kitchen, trying to touch every decoration placed within reach of a child. I followed him away from candles, wine glasses, and a low table covered with porcelain figures. No one offered to help. Lauren sat on the sofa scrolling through photographs on her phone. Mark and Ethan's father, William, watched football in the den. Caleb leaned against the doorway, bored and observant. Cynthia sat beside the fireplace with a glass of wine and watched me manage my son alone. She looked less like a grandmother than a supervisor evaluating an employee. Christmas dinner began shortly after 6. Oliver ate 2 bites of turkey before deciding the bread rolls were the only acceptable food. I cut one into smaller pieces and placed them on his plate. That was when Cynthia began. "So, Natalie," she said brightly, "is Oliver still spending every weekday at that daycare?" The table quieted. It always did. Her criticism worked best when there was an audience. "Yes," I said. "He likes his teachers." "A 4-year-old likes anyone who gives him snacks," Lauren laughed. Cynthia smiled over the rim of her glass. "I just think children need their mothers during these important years. But naturally, every woman has different priorities." I looked at Ethan. He lowered his eyes to his plate. The familiar movement no longer hurt. It confirmed something. "I work because I enjoy my career," I said, "and Oliver is happy." Cynthia gave a sympathetic sigh. "That is exactly what worries me. Everything always seems to begin with what you want." Before continuing, she leaned slightly toward Ethan and whispered something behind her wineglass. I could not hear the words. I saw Ethan's jaw tighten. Then he gave a small nod. It was not the uncertain response of a son embarrassed by his mother. It was the quiet agreement of someone following a plan. I stored the moment away. My phone was recording from inside my handbag beneath the table. I was part of the conversation, exactly as Rebecca had instructed. Cynthia turned back to me. "I stayed home when my children were young. I never placed my ambitions ahead of them." "You also had William paying every household expense," I replied. The smile remained on her face, but her eyes changed. "Marriage is supposed to be a partnership." I agree. "That requires trust, Natalie, not keeping records of everything your husband does." Ethan's fork struck his plate. "Natalie," he warned. I looked at him. "What?" "You know what." "No, I don't." Cynthia's smile widened. She had found the opening she wanted.
Everything is an argument with her. Every dollar is counted, every mistake is remembered. A man cannot live peacefully while being constantly inspected. Lauren nodded. Mark looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Caleb covered a grin with his hand. Ethan stared downward, performing the same helpless silence I'd watched for years. Only now I understood it differently. His mother attacked, he remained innocent, and I became the problem. "I count the money," I said, "because someone has to." Ethan looked up. "Stop. I paid the mortgage for the last 3 months. I covered your credit card in September. I also pay Oliver's preschool fees." His face hardened. Cynthia laughed softly. "There it is. The ledger. You always need everyone to know what you contribute." "No," I said. "I think everyone should know what Ethan has contributed." The table became completely silent. For years, they had waited for me to defend myself badly. That evening, I stopped defending myself. I began presenting the facts.
I folded my napkin beside my plate. "Ask him why our savings account contains $600, I said. "Ask him what happened to the $52,000 we spent 6 years building." Ethan pushed his chair back. "Natalie, ask him about the $12,000 he borrowed from my father and claimed I had approved. Then ask about the $45,000 credit line opened against our house with my signature." Ethan stood so quickly that his chair scraped across the floor. "That is enough." "No," I said. "It was enough months ago." Cynthia set down her glass. "What exactly are you accusing my son of?"
I am describing documents. You have no idea what you're talking about, Ethan said. I have the statements and a forensic report tracing the transfers. Fear appeared in his eyes. What report? Cynthia asked. Ethan ignored her. Natalie, you are humiliating yourself. I am not the one who forged a signature. The silence that followed felt physical. William spoke from the doorway. Did you sign her name? Ethan looked around the room, searching for control. This is complicated, he said. Natalie doesn't understand the structure. I investigate financial fraud for a living. Why should she? William asked. Did you sign her name? Ethan did not answer. That was answer enough. Cynthia turned on me. Even if mistakes were made, there is no excuse for bringing this into our home on Christmas. You brought me into it. I asked about your parenting. You arranged a public attack. Do not be dramatic. I looked at Ethan. He was no longer studying his plate. He stared at me with a hatred so clear that I finally understood what his silence had always protected. Not me, him. As long as Cynthia criticized my career in motherhood, no one asked why Ethan missed dinners, borrowed money, or lost everything we owned. I had been the distraction. You let her do this for years, I said. Every time she tore me apart, you stayed silent because it kept everyone looking at me instead of you. That is not true. It is exactly true. His hand struck the table hard enough to shake the glasses. Oliver flinched. That was the moment all sympathy left me. Ethan pointed toward the hallway. Apologize to my mother or pack your things and leave. I looked around the table. No one spoke. They were waiting for me to break. Instead, I looked toward the sofa beside the Christmas tree. Oliver's red backpack rested beneath it beside his toy fire truck. Everything I needed was prepared. The custody order, the passports, the private account Ethan could not touch, a door. Apologize, Ethan repeated. I met his eyes. Okay, I said. His shoulders loosened. Cynthia reached for her wine. They thought I had surrendered. None of them understood what I had accepted. He had told me to leave. This time, I intended to obey. Ethan did not come home with us. At 8:37 p.m., while I was driving north through the dark with Oliver asleep in the back seat, my phone lit up with a message. Staying at my parents' tonight. We'll talk when you've calmed down and are ready to apologize. I read it at a red light. He still believed he was in control. He believed I would spend the night crying, rehearsing an apology, and wondering how to earn my place back in his family. I placed the phone face down and continued driving. When we reached the house, I carried Oliver upstairs without waking him. He made a small sound when I laid him in bed and wrapped one arm around his stuffed fox. I stood in the doorway for less than a minute. That was the only time I allowed myself to hesitate. Then I went to work. The suitcases were stored on the top shelf of our bedroom closet. I had mentally packed them dozens of times during the previous months, so the real process was almost mechanical. Oliver's clothes, his blue blanket, the stuffed fox, 2 favorite books, the red fire truck from Cynthia's living room, medicine, toothbrushes, and enough snacks to survive an airport with a 4-year-old. Then came the documents, our passports, Oliver's birth certificate, the custody order signed by a Denver County judge, copies of Adrian's financial report, and Simone's signature analysis. The envelope of emergency cash I had kept hidden inside an old winter boot. I packed almost nothing sentimental. There were photographs on the dresser, wedding gifts in cabinets, clothes I had spent years choosing, and books I had carried through 3 apartments. None of them mattered enough to risk staying. At 10:11 p.m., I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The flight I had been watching for weeks was still available. Denver to Madrid, with a connection in Chicago. Departure, 6:20 a.m. 2 one-way tickets. I entered the passenger information without rushing. Before confirming the purchase, I called Rebecca. She answered on the second ring. He told me to leave, I said. Were there witnesses? His entire family. Was your phone recording? Yes. Then follow the plan. Do not contact him. Do not explain where you are going. Keep the custody order with you at all times. I looked toward the staircase. What happens in the morning? I filed the divorce petition as soon as the court opens. The temporary custody order is already active. You are not disappearing with Oliver. You are traveling under a valid court order. Her calmness steadied me. Rebecca? Yes. What if he wakes up before we leave? Then you call the police and show them the order. You do not argue. You do not negotiate. Prepare, file, let him react. I purchased the tickets. The confirmation arrived at 10:19 p.m. For several seconds, I stared at the screen, waiting for fear to overwhelm me.
It did not. I felt the same clean silence I had felt at the dinner table. This was not an impulsive escape. Every step had been reviewed, every document was ready, every dollar I used belonged legally to me. Ethan had given me an ultimatum because he expected me to submit. Instead, he had given me a departure time. I set my alarm for 3:35 a.m., although I knew I would not sleep. I showered, dressed, and checked the bags 3 times. At 1:06 a.m., Ethan sent another message. I hope you understand how much damage you caused tonight. At 1:42, another arrived. Mom is devastated. At 2:15, you need to fix this before Oliver wakes up. I did not answer. At 3:35, the alarm sounded in a room where I had spent 6 years believing silence meant peace. I turned it off immediately. Then I went upstairs to wake my son and leave the house before Ethan discovered that, for once, I had taken his words seriously.
At 3:48 a.m., I lifted Oliver from his bed. He stayed asleep while I carried him downstairs, his face warm against my neck and the stuffed fox trapped between us. Outside, the temperature had dropped below freezing. The porch light cast a pale circle across the driveway while I buckled him into the car seat. The neighborhood was completely silent. At 4:02, I pulled away from the house. Every pair of headlights behind me made my stomach tighten. I imagined Ethan waking at his parents' house, checking his phone, deciding he had punished me long enough. I imagined him driving home and finding the bedroom closet open, the suitcases gone, and Oliver's bed empty. I kept the radio off. The clock changed from 4:11 to 4:23 to 4:39. Oliver stirred as we reached the highway. "Mommy? I'm here." "Where are we going?" "To the airport." He opened his eyes slightly. "On a plane?" "Yes." "Is Daddy coming?" I had practiced the answer with Rebecca because they were words I could not afford to choose badly. "Daddy is staying here for now. You and I are going to visit Spain." He considered this for several seconds. "Does Spain have waffles?" The question nearly broke me. "Yes," I said. "Spain has waffles." He smiled and closed his eyes again. At 4:56, I returned the rental car I had quietly reserved 2 days earlier, so Ethan could not trace our location through the Honda's connected application. At the terminal, I balanced 2 suitcases, a backpack, Oliver, and the folder containing the court order. For one terrible moment, I could not find our passports. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Then I found them in the inner pocket of my handbag, exactly where I had placed them. Security took longer than expected. At 5:21, my phone vibrated. Ethan was calling. I watched his name fill the screen and let the call end. A message followed immediately. "Where are you?" Then another. "Natalie, answer me now." At 5:27, "Where is Oliver?" I did not reply. The custody order was in my hand. Rebecca had filed notice electronically as soon as the courthouse system opened for emergency submissions. Ethan would receive the documents through formal service. I would not explain the case through text messages. At the gate, Oliver woke fully and became fascinated by the planes outside the window. He pressed both hands against the glass and shouted whenever one moved. "Is that ours?" "Not that one." "What about that one?" "No." He asked the same question 6 times. At 5:48, Ethan called again. At 5:53, Cynthia called. At 5:56, Lauren sent a message. "Whatever happened last night, taking Oliver is cruel. Come back before you make this worse." I turned the phone to silent. At 6:01, boarding began.
Oliver held my hand as we walked down the jet bridge. He wore his red backpack and dragged the stuffed fox by one leg. When we reached the aircraft door, he stopped. "This plane is huge." "It is." "Are we really sleeping in the sky?" "For a little while." He grinned and climbed aboard. We found our seats near the middle of the cabin. I buckled him in, placed the blue blanket over his knees, and checked the folder in my bag one more time. The aircraft doors closed with a heavy mechanical sound. It was not dramatic. No music played. No one around us knew that the sound marked the end of my marriage. The plane moved away from the gate. My phone vibrated continuously inside my bag. As we accelerated down the runway, I gripped Oliver's hand. The wheels lifted. Denver disappeared beneath the clouds. For 10 months, I had carried fear like a weight behind my ribs. I had imagined every possible way the plan could fail. But once the ground fell away, the weight vanished. I was not escaping responsibility. I was moving towards safety, with a court order, 2 passports, and enough evidence to make the truth stand without me. For the first time in years, there was nothing left for Ethan to explain away.
We landed in Madrid beneath a pale winter sky. Oliver pressed his face against the window and pointed at everything he could see. The service trucks, the terminal lights, the rows of red-roofed buildings beyond the airport. Is this Spain? Yes. Where Grandma was born. Near here. He smiled as though that made the entire country belong to us. I turned my phone back on while the plane moved toward the gate. The screen came alive immediately. 23 missed calls from Ethan, 9 messages from him, 4 calls from Cynthia, 2 from Lauren, 1 from William. The first call had come less than an hour after takeoff. Ethan must have returned to the house, found the closets open, seen Oliver's empty bed, and finally understood that his ultimatum had not frightened me into obedience. His newest message appeared at the top. "You cannot take my son out of the country." Below it, "I am calling the police." Then, "Whatever lawyer told you this was legal is lying to you." I did not respond. The temporary custody order was valid. Rebecca had already filed the divorce petition and arranged for Ethan to be formally served. I had crossed the border using passports issued lawfully to both Oliver and me. I had not taken anything that belonged to Ethan. I had taken my child under the authority of a judge. Cynthia had left 2 voicemails. I deleted them without listening. Lauren's message was longer. "I don't know what Ethan did, but humiliating him and disappearing with Oliver is not the answer. Mom is sick over this. You need to come home and handle this like an adult." For years, handling things like an adult had meant remaining quiet while their family protected Ethan from the consequences of his choices. I was finished using their definitions. Instead, I opened my email. A completed message had been waiting in my drafts for 6 days. It was addressed to Ethan, Cynthia, Lauren, Mark, and William. I had considered writing a long explanation. Rebecca advised against it. "Do not argue," she said. "Give them the documents. Let the facts speak in the order we choose." The message contained only 5 sentences. "Ethan instructed me to leave your family home in front of multiple witnesses. I have followed his instruction under the protection of a valid temporary custody order. The attached documents explain the financial circumstances that made this action necessary. All future communication regarding Oliver or the divorce must go through my attorney. Do not contact my employer, my father, or Oliver's school." 3 files were attached. The first was Adrian Cole's report. Every transfer, every loss, every borrowed dollar, and every payment arranged in a sequence no charm could rearrange. The second attachment contained the divorce petition and the temporary custody order signed by the judge.
Rebecca had filed the petition that morning, before our international flight landed. By the time Ethan read the email, the case already existed in court. Prepare, file, let him react. The third attachment was the audio recording from Christmas dinner. I had listened to most of it during the flight. I expected to hear Cynthia's insults, Ethan's ultimatum, and my own voice describing the missing money. I heard all of that. But near the beginning, before Cynthia asked about Oliver's daycare, the recording captured the whisper I had noticed but could not understand at the table. Through my headphones, her voice was perfectly clear. "Let me push her tonight," Cynthia murmured. "She'll lose control in front of everyone, and then you can use it against her." There was a quiet clink of silverware. Then Ethan answered, "Fine, just don't let her start talking about the accounts." I replayed the exchange 3 times. For years, I had believed Ethan remained silent because he was weak. He had not been avoiding the conflict. He and his mother had been creating it. They had planned to provoke me publicly, turn my reaction into proof that I was unstable, and keep the conversation away from the money. His silence was not cowardice. It was cooperation. The recording changed nothing about my decision, but it changed the last piece of the story I still misunderstood. I looked at Oliver beside me. He was asking a flight attendant whether Spanish airplanes served waffles. Then I pressed send.
For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the message disappeared from the drafts folder. A small confirmation appeared on the screen. Sent. I placed the phone face up on the tray table and waited.
The first vibration came before the aircraft had reached the gate. Ethan. I watched his name appear, disappear, and appear again. He had received everything now. The report showing where the money went, the petition ending our marriage, the custody order signed before Christmas dinner, and the recording of his own voice agreeing to help his mother provoke me while keeping everyone away from the accounts. For 6 years, Ethan had controlled conversations by changing their meaning. Questions became accusations. Evidence became paranoia. His decisions became my failure to trust him. But documents do not become confused. Recordings do not doubt their memory. Numbers do not apologize for existing. I declined the call. He called again. Then Cynthia called, then Lauren. Within 20 minutes, there were 15 new missed calls and a stream of messages. Ethan began with anger. You planned this. Then denial. That recording is completely out of context. Then accusation. You manipulated everyone at dinner. Then fear. Do not send that report to anyone else. That was the first message that mattered. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Rebecca. Her reply arrived moments later. Do not engage. We have everything we need. By the time Oliver and I collected our suitcases, Ethan had sent another message. My company cannot see those documents. You could destroy my career. I read it twice. He was not worried that the report was false. He was worried that someone important might read it. Adrian's findings were already scheduled to reach the compliance department at Ethan's investment firm. Rebecca had advised that evidence of forged financial documents and undisclosed personal debt could be relevant to the company responsible for allowing him to manage client money. We did not exaggerate. We did not accuse him of anything the records could not prove. We simply delivered the file. On Monday morning, Ethan was placed on administrative leave. The firm opened an internal investigation into his finances, disclosure forms, and client activity. They found that he had repeatedly failed to report debts required under company policy. They also discovered that several trades in his personal accounts violated restrictions imposed on employees. 2 weeks later, he was dismissed. His professional registration was suspended while regulators reviewed the forged loan application and the unexplained transfers. Ethan blamed me. Through his attorney, he claimed I had ruined his reputation out of revenge. Rebecca's response was one sentence. Your client's documented conduct caused the consequences now under review. The home equity lender opened its own investigation. Dr. Simone Hart provided her analysis of the signature. I gave a formal statement confirming that I had never seen or signed the application. What Ethan had dismissed as a private financial decision became possible criminal evidence. For months, he paid attorneys to describe forgery as confusion. The records did not cooperate. Cynthia tried to contact my father.
She left him a message explaining that Ethan had been under tremendous pressure and that families should solve financial misunderstandings privately. My father forwarded the message to Rebecca without replying. Then he called me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I'm sorry, I finally said. You didn't take the money, he answered. I should have told you sooner. You were trying to survive. His voice broke slightly on the final word. My father was not a man who cried easily, and hearing him nearly do it hurt more than anything Ethan had said. I believed him because he used your name, he continued. That belongs to him, not you. The court ordered Ethan to repay the $12,000 as part of the temporary financial arrangements. My father received every cent. I cared more about that than Ethan losing his job. The divorce itself was quieter than the marriage. Ethan's attorney attempted to challenge the custody order, claiming I had acted impulsively and removed Oliver to punish him. Rebecca presented the timeline. The financial report had been commissioned months before Christmas. The passport renewal had been completed legally. My remote work agreement predated the dinner. The emergency custody requests had been filed weeks before Ethan told me to leave. Nothing about my departure was impulsive. Then Rebecca played the recording. Cynthia's voice filled the courtroom. She'll lose control in front of everyone, and then you can use it against her. Ethan's answer followed. Fine, just don't let her start talking about the accounts. For the first time since I had known him, Ethan had no way to change what his words meant.
The temporary custody order remained in place. Later, after evaluations, hearings, and months of arguments filtered through attorneys, it became permanent. Ethan was granted supervised contact at first, followed by limited scheduled calls once the court was satisfied that Oliver would not be used as a messenger or a bargaining tool. The judge did not make that decision because I cried more convincingly. She made it because the evidence formed a pattern. The hidden debt, the forged signature, the vanished savings, the money taken from my father, the attempt to provoke me in front of witnesses and describe my reaction as instability. A real courtroom had finally examined the version of me that Ethan and Cynthia had spent years creating. The records did not recognize her. Cynthia never apologized. She sent one letter through Ethan's attorney, insisting that she had only wanted to protect her son and preserve the family. Rebecca asked whether I wanted to respond. I said no. Cynthia's own voice had already given the only answer that mattered. Let me push her tonight. There was nothing I could write that would explain her more clearly than she had explained herself. William called once, several months later. He said he had not known about the accounts or the loan. He claimed he had believed Ethan was successful and that the tension in our marriage came from my demanding personality. I should have asked more questions, he said. Yes, I replied. He waited, perhaps expecting forgiveness. I had none to offer him. Not hatred, not revenge, simply nothing. Lauren never called again. Mark sent a brief message saying he was sorry for laughing at dinner. Caleb removed me from social media, which felt like the most honest response anyone in that family gave. A year has passed. Oliver is 5 now. He asks for waffles in both English and Spanish and corrects my pronunciation when he thinks I sound too American. We live in a small apartment in Valencia, several streets from the park where my mother used to play as a child. From the kitchen window, I can see a narrow strip of sky between 2 old buildings and hear scooters moving through the street below. It is not the home Ethan and I bought. It is smaller. The floors creak, the elevator stops half an inch below each landing, the kitchen has only 2 drawers, and one refuses to close properly. I love every part of it. Oliver attends a school within walking distance. His teachers know his favorite dinosaur and that he refuses to eat tomatoes unless they are hidden in sauce. No one has ever suggested that I love him less because I work. I still investigate financial fraud. I still read every document before signing it.
I still save receipts, take screenshots, and write down dates. But the files I keep now are ordinary ones. School forms, rental agreements, medical records. Drawings, Oliver insists, are important legal documents. The folder called Regional Claims Review remains encrypted on a hard drive in Rebecca's office. I have not opened it since the divorce was finalized. I do not need to. Sometimes people ask whether I regret leaving the way I did. They ask whether I should have warned Ethan, whether taking an international flight was too extreme, whether I could have stayed and fought from inside the house. Those questions usually come from people who imagine departure begins when a suitcase is packed. Mine began months earlier, when I found my name written by someone else on a loan against the room where my son slept. The flight was not the decision. It was only the final step. Ethan once told me that I had kept score throughout our marriage. For years, I believed it was an insult. Now I understand that he was right. I counted every missing dollar. I remembered every lie. I recorded every moment they expected me to forget. He assumed keeping score meant I wanted to win an argument. He never understood that I was building a map toward the door my mother had left open for me. And when he finally stood in front of his family and ordered me to leave, I did not scream, I did not beg, I simply followed the map.